what do you feel is wrong with current educational systems around the world? We're not saying there's nothing good about it, but what do you think is wrong about it? Do please say what is good about it too, if you wish. So I'm going to ask that first off to Craig Sheely. Craig, what's good and what's bad?
Well, hi
In
everybody.
4 minutes. I mean, it's
Can,
not
yep, I got it.
long
I'll look
session.
at, I'll keep my clock right here.
Okay.
Um, so y'all hear me okay?
Yeah, it's good.
Great. Okay, good. First, want to just say hello to everybody and a big thank you to Charles Fowler for this amazing event, World Values Day, and his leadership and vision of that, and of course for pulling up us together to have a discussion on such important issues. I'll also put in a plug for Gave. Go to gave.global if you would. There's no charge for this. It's a nonprofit, but we need everybody to be joining this work together. So if you take one thing from what I say, come join us, become a member, join our launch on November 6th, and we'll continue this discussion over time. So again, with thanks to Charles and all of you for taking the time. So I've got a little less than 4 minutes at this point. Tough to answer such a big question, but a really interesting and important question. And I'm going to come at this. I always try to do this in a way that's non-academic, and I am afraid that I often slip into form a little bit. I'll try to find middle ground here. I think the biggest problem with education, and I base this on a lot of work for over 30 years with wonderful colleagues all over the world who look at how learning actually occurs, and not just any kind of learning that's associated typically with values-based interventions that have a high values-based content to it, which means that it's often highly emotional. There are often quote unquote non-conscious processes involved. I'm guessing Anne will speak to some of these issues too. I look forward to hearing some of that. But these are the kinds of learning that we look at are like in multicultural education or study abroad, the kind of work Marina does, for example. You'll hear from her as well. So what we do is we look at what actually happens when people are exposed to these kinds of values-based interventions like values-based education, VBE. And what we generally find is that who people are at the beginning of those experiences in terms of how they're structured. When we look at issues of mixed methods measurement, we use a measure called the Beliefs, Events, and Values Inventory, or BEVI, but we use lots of different types of measurement as well. So when we look at basic structures of self, how we deal with emotion, how we deal with meaning making, how we our quote unquote beliefs about gender or culture or religion, these kinds of things, and our life histories, our demographic variables, etc. We look at all of that together and we look at it at the beginning of an intervention. What actually happens as a result of the intervention? Does change occur? What we find is that it's highly statistically, empirically predictive. Who people are at the beginning of the experience is highly predictive of whether or not they actually learn, change, and grow, quote unquote, as a result of the experience. And so, in terms of the problem of education, if you will, I think a big overarching problem is that we're not paying attention enough to who human beings actually are, how we get structured in the ways that we are emotionally, attributionally, how life history plays into that, etc., and how that gets laid down in the structures within us as belief content, value content, how all of this relates to our need for meaning in life, growth in life. And we're not paying enough attention to that. And so when we do, which I'll get to, I think, in Charles' second question, we can see lots of positives about how a deeper attention to those kinds of aspects inside human beings leads to much more effective processes and outcomes of learning. So I'll stop there and let my colleagues have their say. There's plenty more to say as we all will struggle, but I'll stop there.
That was quite a gallop. Thanks very much, Craig. That was excellent in a nutshell. I hope everyone was paying close attention. Uh, so we'll move on. Anne, perhaps you would like to take it up now. Um,
Thank you. And
what's
I will
wrong,
just,
kind of think, about with the educational systems around the world today? I mean, in the US and elsewhere.
yeah,
Talk about what you want.
well, thank you. I, uh, I am old, so I have a lot of experience as well. And I am really honored to speak to everyone today and say hello to all of you. And I reiterate Craig's urging you to join GAVE. I think it's a wonderful organization and will grow by leaps and bounds as we get ourselves out. And this is one important way of doing that. I'm going to talk today just about development as the aim of education. Something that I think is wrong with education today is that we don't think of development as the aim. And I think this is also what Craig was saying. We don't put the human beings as and their histories and who they are really at the forefront of education. So it was in the 70s that Lawrence Kohlberg actually wrote an article called Development as the Aim of Education. It was popular at the time, but it never really changed any minds or any hearts, and it certainly didn't change any school systems or governmental and educational administrators. The view was never adopted. And so the view that fostering the development of children and the importance of creating really environments and conditions in which children can thrive is not something that is central to education, in my view. It's still learning and it's still achieving. So what I think is wrong with education today, from my observations, and I must say limited, I'm just going to focus on 8 different mistakes or errors in emphasis that I think kind of tie up our educational reform efforts into knots. I'm not saying that these shouldn't exist in education, but what I'm saying is the emphasis is wrong. So I'm just going to tick them off for discussion later on. 1, to focus on testing rather than on learning. These are things you're familiar with. 2, to focus on achievement rather than on developing knowledge. 3, to focus on outcomes rather than problem solving, problem finding, and actually problem defining. And for students to focus on pleasing others, parents, teachers, and especially their peers, rather than students getting to know others. How do they get to know others, really? Understand them, respect them, and in the end, actually care for them. 5, I think students also focus on obeying rules. Or we ask students to focus on obeying rules rather than having them get to know themselves, their own interests, their own talents and passions. Getting to know themselves leads to self-awareness and self-knowledge, and actually self-reflection. And as Rousseau said, obedience to a law which we prescribe to ourselves is liberty. So once we know ourselves, we're happy to give ourselves some prescriptions. And in that, we find purpose. We also focus on schools too much as institutions that should be smooth running and managed for efficiency. Not that they're not institutions, not that we don't care about their being smooth running and managed well, but we should first focus on them as communities. They should be imbued with values chosen, discussed, and expressed in the daily lives of teachers, students, and staff. My 7th idea is that to focus on creating schools as substitute families is also not a good idea, especially for troubled and disadvantaged youth. And we often do this. But children have their own families, for better or for ill. I would rather have us focus on schools as communities in relationship to families and in relationship to neighborhoods. And lastly, and this I really am out of my depth, I think it's a huge mistake because to focus desperately on trying to control and manage social media and AI, because I'm so ill-informed about both of these ideas and technologies. But I still think it would make more sense to develop schools and curricula in which teachers and students can examine the nature of AI, the nature of social media, and do experiments about their uses and find out about their misuses. So those are my 8 emphases that I would rather see than the ones that I enumerated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. That's a really helpful approach, I think. And Marina, can we move on to you and just ask you the same question? You know, what's wrong with our current educational systems from your different perspective in higher education?
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here, actually, because this is not normally the people I talk to. Generally, I address people in internationalization of higher education, which is sort of a narrow area. And I think that that's part of the problem, right? That's part of seeing that siloed education, looking at education per se as just looking at a profession and trying to get the most skilled students in that one profession, but forgetting about the human side of things, forgetting about giving them tools to be more self-aware, to grow, to understand themselves first in order to relate to others. And in this relation to others, that's where internationalization has a big role, right? Because it's long, it has never been the case that we have not had to uh, relate to other people from other cultures, because culture is such a word that it doesn't, when we say about internationalization, where we mean so many more things. It's not only internations, right? So how do we relate to the other if we don't know how to relate to ourselves? And that's something that I think our systems in education are really failing at. Internationalization, when I talk to my people, we tend to look at it as a response to that better world. We tend to look at it as the way to build those bridges, as the way to make the students more open-minded, more tolerant, and so that tomorrow, when they become the leaders of this world, they're able to fix some of the mistakes that all the older generations have made. First, that's a lot of pressure. Second, how good of a job are we doing in doing that? When we are serving still a very small number of these students, when unfortunately there's still a lot of elite being served, in the fact that not everybody can have an international experience as we know it. And so we still have a lot of work there. There's, of course, organizations, hopefully like mine, that are doing our bit to make it more inclusive. Inclusive becoming such a big word linked to internationalization nowadays. But then my research focused on an area that was not just the students, because we're looking at the students, but we're forgetting about the whole system. We're forgetting about the whole institution. We're forgetting who else is there in that institution. And I looked at the stakeholder group that is less looked at normally, which is non-academic staff, which is professional staff. How are we meant to bring those global competencies to the students if staff are not brought on board, if staff are not included, to mention the inclusion bit? And what I saw with the professional development course that I created was that it is possible to have significant change just through a course by empowering people in our institutions. And then hopefully that trickles down to the student themselves. I could be talking about this forever, but I won't. I will now stop here and hopefully continue afterwards. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marina. That's really interesting. And I think just finally to complete the round, Neil, your take on what's wrong with the educational systems. Again, you have a very international perspective, not just a UK, I know, even though you're based in the UK.
Thank you, Charles. It's so good to see so many people I know on this call. And thank you for your amazing support. I'm so excited today because one of my dreams is coming true, and GAVE is the embodiment of that. I've been saying for many years that all of us involved in this amazing work should really pull in the same direction so that we can have more power in the system. And that's why I'm so thrilled. What's wrong with the world? Well, I was in a school yesterday. I was in a school, three schools last week in the UK, and it's really interesting, this question. I want to separate two things. First of all, the wonderful teachers I meet around the world, they are amazing. The school in Birmingham in England that I was in yesterday, I was just blown away with the absolute enthusiasm, dedication of these folk who are working within a system. And I'm a bit of a maverick in some ways, and I always want people to be a bit revolutionary. And I say, work within your system to do what you know is right. Um, in my simple way of seeing things in the world, I see systems run by people who know nothing about how children learn and how we best resource their learning. It's people that are really, they want the next vote at the election, or they pick up on what they think parents want. So we want discipline, for instance. So let's have more of that. Let's test the children. Anne was referring to testing. One of the biggest evils in our system that switches learning off in thousands of students is testing. I was talking with Professor Creek this morning in a podcast that I run, and she was saying, learning power is reduced if you have a test. So why do we do it? So we must have a system which is for the 21st century. We all know that the current systems around the world were based on a 19th century factory model of education. It is not fit for purpose now as a system. We have these marvelous people working in it, but a lot of the people have vested interest, and that stops change. If you're being paid thousands of dollars or pounds or whatever you're earning in, then you don't want the system to change. So the challenge is how we transform the current systems around the world. You can't just change them overnight. We have to transform them. So the challenge is, how do we transform? What is it that we want to do? Sir Ken Robinson, that wonderful person, if you've heard his TED talk, you'll know how wonderful he was. But Ken Robinson and I have been saying for years, one of the big problems with the education system is unbalanced. It's, if you think of cognitive and affective, the affective domain doesn't have status. The creativity, the arts, awe and wonder, the inner world, all that stuff is low status because you don't test it, you see. So we have the cognitive subjects that have status. So we unbalance. So that means we turn out students who are unbalanced. They're not developed holistically. So I hope the second part of our discussion tonight will be how we help children, young people, university students, how do we develop them holistically so that they can be self-led so that they can be values-based, as our organizations want, and actually ensure that our world flourishes. We're at a time of incredible danger where things are so complex, but at the same time, there's a movement, there's a swell of a change, and I can almost smell it in the atmosphere, and I see it when I visit wonderful places, and we need to focus our intention of that. But please don't let's become too academic, too in our brains, because that allows a space for people who love power to move in and cherry pick and say, well, have a bit of this, but we don't want Anne or Marina or Craig or Neil. We want, because our outcome is a docile society in which we can do what the hell we like because we are corrupt leaders. So self-leadership, I will talk about in a little while. So Charles, I'll stop there, but I'm just emphasizing that it's not the people. One of my claims to fame that I want someone to knock me off my perch is that I probably visited more schools worldwide than anyone else. And my overriding thing is that teachers, helpers in schools, communities are wonderful, but the system itself needs rearranging. Thank you.
Which thank you so much, Neil. And that leads us very nicely, of course, into the second round of questions, which is all to do with what we do about it. You know, what is our vision for change? How do we want to change that system? So I'll ask you again, and actually I'll do it in the same order. What is your vision for a better educational system, either in the system you're most familiar with, or for that matter, around the world? I'll ask Craig to respond first. Craig.
Yeah, I always love hearing Neil talk, and it's delightful also to have Anne and Marina here as well. I think there's really nice complementarity in the ways that we're approaching this. In terms of, I guess I would sort of frame, if I'm understanding the second question, kind of solutions, let's say, or ways forward. Again, with forgiveness for the redundancy, I think the single most important thing we need to do is come together and continue this discussion and target it, make it directed in specific directions, so that we're not diffusing the amazing work that you're hearing from these folks, all that Charles and others are doing through World Values Day. We need forums, and GAVE is one of them. So please sign up, join us, and let your voice be heard. That would be the one thing. Honestly, we need time. We need to come together and listen to one another and figure out where we need to go. That would be one major solution, I would say. A second solution, I'll just pick up on Neil's comment about testing. He's right that a lot of, as I say this as a clinical psychologist who does a lot of testing and trains doc students in testing, he's right that a lot of psychological measurement has a dark side, a shadow side, a reductionistic side to it that tends to limit and categorize who we are as humans. There's value to that, however. There can be usefulness to it. But they're just different kinds of testing approaches, different sorts of assessment approaches, and those that are what we would refer to as ecologically valid, meaning that they're emergent from and grounded in real world dynamics, the things you've heard so far, things like human emotion, human need. If measurement takes those things into account, it can actually be a very powerful evaluator and facilitator of learning, growth, and development. So don't write testing off completely. Make a distinction between reductionistic approaches and those that are more, as Neil put it, holistic and ecologically valid. There's that. The other thing I would say in terms of, so I've said coming together, we need to come together. GAVE's one way to do that. I've commented on better, deeper approaches to assessment and the intervention that flows from that. A third thing is to really picking up on some of what both Anne and Marina said in different ways, different levels of analysis. The one conclusion we've reached from a lot of evidence over the years, both from an evaluation side and then looking at best practices, are that there are these 8 Ds of learning, growth, and change. And I'm not going to have time here to go into all of this, but we actually know quite a bit about what causes, quote unquote, change to occur at a values-based level, how the duration of an experience, how different it is from what someone is used to, the capacity they have to be sort of changed by the depth of the experience that we expose them to, how motivated they are to be changing, how well we as interveners determine who our audiences are as students, how well we design and deliver our interventions, and then how well do we debrief. So these 8 Ds are empirically developed ways of understanding the conditions under which change occurs. Marina has referenced this. She's done some quite brilliant work focusing on an underserved group in this mix, which are the people who are the managers, administrators, I would add the teachers also of, it's not just the students, but all all of the members of the community. This is why the work of Terry Lovat, Ron Toomey, and others and certainly Neil in the field of values-based education are so important, because they show us the way in terms of how we build these communities that are values-based, and that's what we need. So it's all there for us, but we need to come together, learn from one another, and direct our talents, energies, and experiences in directions that I suspect all of us on this call share in one way or another. So I'll stop there. Those are some potential solutions.
Thank you so much, Craig. That's good. And it's a different perspective, as you say. The next one, this question to Anne, really. Anne, what's your vision for a better educational system, a better future of education?
Well, thank you. A hugely challenging question. A hugely challenging question that I'm going to answer from a little different perspective. I'm going to stay with my notion that development should be the first aim of education. And thinking just within that, I'm going to speak more to how we build community and foster fairness in children and youth and teachers and schools than I am addressing the larger school systems. Although, of course, as Neil points out, they're probably most in need of change. So I did most of my research and work with Lawrence Kohlberg while I was at Harvard, and continued that. And we worked in schools, both in the US and around the world, both in Asian countries as well as European countries. And we called this approach the just community approach, for a notion of justice and fairness and for a focus on community. So I want to give you some examples of how these teachers, students, and schools work, so that you can see the way in which values-based education and what we were calling, quote, moral education are, I think, one and the same. Because if you have the bedrock of community and fostering fairness and development, you really also have the basic values you need, that other values then come into play when schools, students, and teachers face particular issues and problems. So let me give you just a few examples from these just community schools around the world. So one thing we found in our research is that when teachers work in these schools and focus on helping students and working with students to foster community and fairness, teachers develop. They develop in their rational thinking, they develop in their emotional attitudes and emotional sense of well-being with the students. There's a friendliness that enters. There's a caring that enters. And in these communities, students and teachers each have one vote. So it's also true that everyone's opinion needs to be substantiated. So this makes teachers very involved. They can't just say, I'm the teacher. They have to argue for their point of view. And this makes decision-making for the students and the teachers actually thrilling. They love being in democratic communities. They love having a say. And they love seeing how the community will handle different issues. Now, students, they discuss and break rules regularly at the beginning of these experiments or these interventions. But they also soon begin to talk about the fact that not following the rules they've made doesn't make much sense. And they begin to have strong feelings for others in the desire to treat them fairly, because they want to be treated fairly and because they begin to care for each other. So the sense of community, sense of being a member of a community, and the value of membership becomes a sense of one's identity. It gives them the experiencing of self-reflection, followed by the motivation to want to be a part of this community and a self-reflective, knowledgeable, contributing member of the community. It's also true that the schools themselves grow year by year. They're transformed by the issues that they face and that face the students and the teachers. And in every discussion, of course, about an issue, values come into play. you can't really have a discussion about how to solve a particular problem or issue without talking about the values that are in play that lead to different sets of solutions. Let me just give a couple examples. So rule breaking is pretty common in schools. Rule breaking leads to consideration for fairness. And in every single Just Community program we've had and that I've known about, fairness has become a defining aspect. So fairness is a huge value that comes to play when people have the chance to talk and discuss issues with each other. Another value that comes into play very quickly is being pro-social, or valuing membership and valuing each other as individuals. And in these communities where they not only made rules, but made punishments for breaking rules, the discussions turned quickly to pro-social punishments. How do we help each other be better members? How do we help each other get to school on time? Small issues, but issues that led to valuing of themselves and others in very deep ways. Also, sometimes there's stealing. At one point, this led a school to decide that they, instead of in past stealing incidents where they tried to blame or find the person who perpetrated the stealing, they decided they should have collective restitution. Now, it took a few discussions to come to this conclusion, but they thought that valuing trust, and that's the value that came up in these discussions, we'd rather trust each other than blame each other. And so trust rose in almost, I can tell you, all of these that we certainly studied as a central value between the members of the communities.
And can I just stop you there, because we're pushed for time a little bit on this, but I think that's amazing. And
You're leaving my favorite example out, but maybe I could get it in later.
you probably sneak it in later if that's.
But can I just say one last statement?
Yeah.
Let me just end by saying that I really truly believe, even though we need a lot of change at the institutional and governmental levels, that when development becomes the aim of education, that only when it becomes the aim of education, will education take its respect, rightful and strong and self-respect. And I'm just messing this up because I'm so nervous now. So let me just say, I think when development becomes the aim of education, education will have the respect it needs to take its central place in transforming society. I really believe that as long as we worry about and admit and talk with other people and with teachers and parents and school administrators, focus on aspects like testing or like particular aspects, we will not change the fundamental value that education has in American or in international societies. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Anne. That's great. And I'm sorry for pushing you towards the end.
That's okay. I wasn't keeping time, obviously.
It's okay. Marina. Same question.
Your question asks about my vision, and I've mentioned how sometimes internationalization of higher education, if it equals study abroad, which it shouldn't, it becomes very elitist and it doesn't get to everybody. But there is the person who is considered the father of internationalization at home, Bengt Nilsson, wrote this vision that I'm going to paraphrase. I've shortened it. But I think it's still very powerful and still very true today. And that is still driving as well. It's very much my vision of internationalization of higher education. And it says, I have a dream. I would like to see all our students with the added value an internationalized curriculum can give. Besides good knowledge in their subject area, they would have an open mind and generosity towards other people, know how to behave in other cultures, and how to communicate with people with different religions, values, and customs, and not be scared of coping with new and unfamiliar issues. Now, that for me is what makes me wake up every day, right? I mean, what makes me get to work every day for internationalization, this kind of internationalization, which is very value driven. It is about building that better world. It is about these students having these tools to connect with others. And we can, I believe there's plenty of people out there that are doing this, that are trying to do this. But one of the things that I learned through Sukti, through this professional development course for professional staff, is that we cannot assume people know how to do this. We're still very much sending students back and forth, hoping that that international experience will instill in them global competences. But does it? How do we prepare them for that? Those that may have a lot of prejudice, are they coming back with those still more ingrained? How do we do a better job? And I think that it is about this inclusive way of looking at internationalization. I work for an organization that does a study abroad, but who also looks at how can we reach more students? How can we get to the students that are not mobile nowadays? How can we get to those underrepresented students? And the same way we cannot assume that people know how to do this, we need to provide tools. And I think that that's where GAVE can do a great job, building these spaces of reflection, of communication, but also educating others, also reaching out to others. I connect very much with what Neil said. There's a lot of people doing great work there, but if we don't reach out even more, then we're letting others having all the power, but not the right tools, not the right mindsets, make all the decisions. I'm going to stop here now.
Fantastic. Thank you, Marina. That was very powerful. I mean, what good points you're all making. It's there's so many points to make, aren't there? And we have so little time, but we'll all return to it, the same subject another time. Neil, over to you. Lastly, your vision for the future.
Thank you, Charles. I'm so appreciating listening to the other speakers too on this call. And I'm just aware that Professor Terence Lovett is also in the background there. And sometimes we forget we're often looking forward and trying to think of what we should do rather than thinking what we have done and what is successful at the moment. You know, for the past 30 years, I've been promoting values-based education. Charles has been doing it in his way of the Human Values Foundation. There's so many of us that have been working in educational settings and finding incredible changes. My own background was as a general educator. I was asking questions about behavior of human beings back in the 80s and why people were seeming to decline in their way of relating to each other. And so I set up an experiment in an English school to see that what would happen if you gave children access to an ethical vocabulary. What if you deliberately inducted them into values? What would happen? And we were blown away with the results because we found that the children, first of all, the staff just changed because their relationships changed. So the biggest effect was on them first. Then the students, agency, knowing about the values, being more aware of each other, academic diligence, relational trust, all these wonderful characteristics about character development suddenly happened. Terry in Australia did a fantastic bit of research, longitudinal research over a number of schools, which validated my Oxford University research and showed that this is the way forward. We were in front of our times in a sense, and time has caught up with us, because what do we see now? Someone referred to AI. Do we really need a knowledge-based curriculum anymore? My Google can tell me anything I want to know. But what it doesn't do is give me basic human intelligences. And this is where values-based education comes in. What do we need to develop in children, young people, students now? We need to give them ethical intelligence.
Mhm.
To develop ethical intelligence, which I define as the ability to self-regulate yourself ethically. Can you imagine a world if our leaders were ethically led? It would be so different. So that's number one. Number two, think of critical intelligence, emotional intelligence. Those are the other human intelligences that we need to develop in our systems. So in the school yesterday, it was asking the question, who do you want to be in the world? Not what do you want to do in the world? Who is it? I was listening to Hala, the president of Iceland, a few weeks ago when we were working on the well-being economy. And she was saying the way out for humanity is in. That means we have to go inside ourselves, ask what sort of people do we want to be in the 21st century. That, my friends, is the way that we're going to allow humanity to flourish if we come alongside that. So that's the big question. Values-based education, as Terry said on a wonderful video I took of him, he said, values-based education is the answer because it's holistic, it's a philosophy, it's not just one method of working, it's about inclusive behaviors and curriculum that nurtures the individuals so that they can be the best person that they can be. So they're not duped by politicians into following some political ideology. They have that intelligence, will say, hang on here, I'm not going to be led in that way. So this is a wake-up call. Values-based education makes us more aware of ourselves and the world around us, because it has a secret ingredient, and the secret ingredient is reflective practice, that ability to go in yourself, to reflect, and then to come out. Then you get wisdom in our world, and we need a world led by wise people, not people who want their egos massaged in all the ways that we see. So revolutionary stuff, but it started a long time ago. Let's make the most of it rather than thinking, let's have a meeting about what we should do in the future. The beginnings are already in the system now. So we'll transform the whole of the system. That's my vision. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you all very much for your vision. Thank you, Neil, and everyone for not only telling us what's wrong, but indicating where we should look. And as you say, there's a lot of good things, wonderful things going on already, if we can just build on them. So what we're going to do now is we've got a few minutes left, and we'll just take the panel away, return to everyone on looking at each other. So I'm just going to move all the spotlights that are on you all, and we'll have a discussion really among ourselves. Craig, where have you gone? Oh, there you are. Good. So we'll return to a full session where we can all see each other a little bit and really get some reactions. We do have, as Neil mentioned, we have Terry Lovett, Professor Terry Lovett, with us, who joined us this morning in my morning at our earlier session. And it's great to have you, Terry, at this later session. But before we ask him if he's got anything more to contribute, let's give a chance to everyone else that's here to say, what they think, where we've got it right, where we've got it wrong, whether they agree with some of what's said, all of what's said, none of what's said, and make points or suggestions or ask questions. Does anyone want to kick off? Maddie, yeah. There you are. Maddie, you
hi there. Sorry, a while to unmute. Thank you very much for that. I'm Maddie Halliday, and I'm involved in the UK Values Alliance with Charles. I'm not involved in education, but passionately interested in it as a parent and a grandmother. And I just wanted to sort of say how fulfilling I found listening to all the contributors, and really do agree very strongly about education being reframed as the foundation for human development, and not only, as it has for such a long time, to service the economy in a very narrow way. And I feel that these shifts are really critical because certainly in the UK, where I'm living and more familiar, is that some of the debates on education, I think, are deteriorating, not improving in that regard. And the other point I just wanted to make was that I understand that there's a lot of educationalists and academics that are potentially involved in GAVE or GAV, but I think the alliances across other relevant interest groups, such as parents with a real deep interest in nurture parenting, which is very linked, and also children and young people themselves and the forums that they create are, I think, very important to build those alliances, and perhaps that was planned. And just to say that clearly a lot of what was discussed today relates to developmental psychology and the understanding of how humans develop. And the fact I've always been astounded about how little, certainly in the UK, that's informed educational policy and practice. And so I really wanted to say how much I welcome and endorse the comments. And I feel that there's huge opportunities in the UK for progress. I live in Scotland, although you wouldn't know from my accent, and would like to contribute in however modest way I can here. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Maddie. Anyone else like to make a contribution here? Do raise your hands either physically or using the gadget. Who else would like to have a word? Terry, would you like to add anything? You've already given us your views on both questions early on today, but is there anything you'd like to add, having heard what Terry, I should say, is one of the leading lights of GAVE, distinguished professor from Newcastle University, and conducted or certainly led much of the leading research on values education over the last 20 odd years. Terry.
Yeah, and in Scotland at the moment, Maddie, so I might run into you. No, simply to say how strongly I endorse all of the sentiments that have been made. As Neil intimated, it's not as though we don't know what works. We do know what works. We've had experience of what works. A lot of people have. It's getting through to systems about what works. I had the amazing experience of being involved for 8 years in the Australian Values Education Program, where we really did see transformation. I mean, we saw the whole approach to teaching and learning upended. And, some of the most difficult, troublesome schools and pupils within them truly transformed. And I mean, I know that's a, florid sort of talk, but when you've experienced it, you're not afraid to say these things. Also, sadly, I experienced a system turning away from that for reasons of, wanting to improve PISA scores and all of that sort of nonsense that we're all so familiar with. Ironically, Australia's PISA scores have tanked. We were actually doing extremely well on those basic measures when we had a comprehensive values education approach, and we're doing abysmally now when systems have been put in place that are designed to chase those scores. There's a huge lesson there. Getting that through to politicians and bureaucrats, of course, is another issue, because there are all sorts of other pressures. And as a couple of people intimated, politicians and bureaucrats are often pulled by all sorts of strings other than what the research shows, or indeed what is clearly in the best interests of students. They get caught up in media campaigns and sometimes, parent groups that don't understand some of these subtleties and, like the idea of their child being tested and measured and all of these sorts of things. It's a huge challenge. but I take some heart in the fact that a whole lot of people have seen what works. Clearly, what's happening in schools around the world at the moment is not working. Student disengagement, bullying statistics in some of the OECD countries are just appalling for societies that have the resources that we have. Scores in basic literacies and numeracies are not good anyway. There's a teacher attrition, all sorts of things, all sorts of issues. Clearly, things are not working. And I get the feeling that, it's a little bit like what's just happened in the last week in Israel and Gaza. Eventually, if you beat the drum loudly enough, something changes. And I have a sense that over the next decade or so, we will see systems at least starting to turn the right corner.
Let's hope so. Yeah. Thank you, Terry. That makes a good, I wouldn't say a wrap up, but it's certainly a call to action, really. And just following on, I think there's room for, a little bit of a minute or two further if people have got the time, but just in case people start slipping away, because we've passed the hour, just to make that invitation again, do that Craig and Neil and I made earlier, if you're interested in this discussion, if you're interested in continuing it and doing something about this, then do join us. And we're having this public launch event on the 6th of November. Again, one earlier event, one later event to cater for different time zones. And I put the registration link in the chat, so you can get it off of there, or you can find it easily. Well, not that easy necessarily on Google, because they're not picking up GAVE yet, but you can find it on the World Values Day website, but easier if you find it now. So do join us. And we're going to really go through our plans, what we're aiming to do, why GAVE, what we're going to do, and our sort of collective vision for the future. We'll be touching on all those a little bit, and there'll be space for people to discuss and talk and converse. Then we want to hear from people that come along and ask them what they think, because that's the point of it, really. We want to listen as well as pontificating. Not that we would pontificate. So do come along. If there's any further comments, questions, or anything else anyone wants to say, now's your chance. Otherwise, we'll wind down and say thank you very much to everyone. Anyone got any further comments or anything to say? If not, okay. Wait a minute.
A huge thank you to you.
Sorry, you weren't able to finish and give your favorite quote. Do take the opportunity, please.
Anne? Oh, thank you. No, I just want to really emphasize the fact that someone who wasn't engaged in something called values-based education certainly was doing values-based education by another name. We called it moral education. Many of you will find this if you look into what GAVE is going to do and what GAVE does do. So I encourage you, don't think you have to do values-based education per se, but come with your ideas about what values mean in your life of the school that you would like to see instantiated. Maybe under religious education, maybe under a lot of different kinds of names. But I think GAVE is global, and global enough that we all can find homes and be much stronger. I think this is the goal of GAVE, to really start to impact policy. And we need everyone in the world for this. So I just really encourage you.
Lovely. Thank you, Anne. Absolutely. Here for that. So thank you, everyone. It's been great to have you along. I hope it's been interesting. And as I say, do come and join us again.